All right, good morning, everybody. So today we do have Darryl with us again to help us go ahead and understand and review an appraisal in an underwriter's perspective. He's going to pretty much just give us the key points of what we need to look for, especially when we have those little one-off properties, all that good stuff. Darryl, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Excuse me if I sound a little froggy. I'm fighting allergies and all of that stuff, but I think that I can get through this pretty simply, and I want it to be as informative as possible. We're always going to be cognizant of time, so I do want you to just make a note of your questions and whatnot, and then we'll address them all, as time permits. Okay, so looking at appraisal from an underwriter's point of view. Now, what we're going to be looking at is what's considered a conventional appraisal. The rules between conventional and government appraisals, meaning FHA and VA, they're not very diverse. It's not a whole lot of difference. So if you can understand it from this perspective, there's not going to be much that's going to, that'll derail you on the others. Okay, so one thing, from this first page, each page, I'm going to show you some key information. I want you to recognize the as of date, because the clock starts as it pertains to the shelf life, so to speak, of an appraisal. It starts at the as of date, not your receive date. So for government loan, let me start with conventional loans, it's 120 days. That 120 days will start from March 2nd. Not April 18th if you just got it today. Likewise, if it is a government appraisal, the governments have extended their appraisals shelf life out to 180 days. So consequently, it'll be 180 days from the as of date. Now, this isn't the only place that you'll see that, but as I said, as we go through these pages, I want you to notice everything that's very important about it. But you will see that date should be consistent throughout. Here's on this cover page, here's the first time that you're going to see what the actual appraised value is. I always advise anyone who's reviewing appraisal to have a notepad or something to write some key information down as you're going through to review it, because then if any flags pop, then you'll know where, you'll be able to address them. Okay, now this is effectively the first page of the appraisal. Now from here, as there's the appraisal, the first page is broken down into sections. There's your subject, and you can see to the left, your subject, the contract, the neighborhood, the site, and improvements. So we're going to break down these sections, and I'm going to show you the key information on each one of them. Now, first up on the subject section, obviously you want to make sure that your address matches your application. And if you have a contract, you should have that open as well. But if it's a purchase, you want to make sure that it matches exactly. Not, if the contract says street and this doesn't have street or avenue, it should have street, because of those little variations, it could be a totally different property. So make sure your address, very important. The owner of public record, this should match the person who's vested in title, and if it's a purchase, it should match who the seller is. So unless they're selling it via, POA or something like that. Of course, your borrower should match, the borrower record on your loan. Now, the only time that this would variate is if it is a transferred appraisal, because if in fact on a government loan, especially an FHA loan, if that appraisal is being transferred because the initial loan fell out of escrow for whatever reason, it will still have the original buyer on there, because an appraisal is assigned by, or it's registered by its case number. So that's a little government variation. But like I said, you want to make sure that your owner is matching. Now, even if in fact it is a refinance, your owner and the borrower should be the same person, or at least this person should be on title. You always want to make note of your parcel number. Now that you know where it is, you don't have to write it down, but you can refer back to it. Going line by line, you want to make sure it does have real estate taxes. We're not using this to calculate or validate the taxes. but the appraisal is incomplete if it does not have that information. Neighborhood name, this really is important if in fact it is a PUD, because this will be the name of the complex. And then going down from the occupant, you know, you can tell with this saying a tenant, so this is a non-owner occupied loan. Or if it was, it would be a non-occupied, non-owner occupied purchase. But if it was an owner occupied, or if it was a vacant, you know, purchase, it would show there. Here's where you see your first idea if it is a PUD, or, you know, if this was a condo appraisal, it would be the same thing. But here's where your HOA information is. Typically, from an underwriting aspect, I'm going to use that number in the debt ratio. We will want to validate that number, but if it's there and you're doing your pre-qualification, or if you're just reviewing the appraisal and you weren't sure of what it was, this is where you'll first see it, because the appraiser gets that information. You know, he's not told that. So it's not something where, you know, if you're ordering an appraisal, you say, well, the HOA is 250. He may put 250 down, but he's supposed to have validated that. That's the key element of, obviously, of the subject section. Now, the contract section, now I'm gonna treat this as if this were a purchase. On the contract section, it is very important that the appraiser has to have a copy of the contract. So if it said he did not analyze it, then he would have to provide an addendum with this information. The contract price, date of contract, this should match the original contract. When I say original, now there's, you know, negotiations after the fact where you might get a counteroffer, addendum, or something like that. If this varies from the contracted price, you should have an addendum within your contract. Everything else is self-explanatory. Now, this part right here is where there are any seller concessions. Again, if in fact the contract has been amended or there's an addendum, this will not match. But if there is no addendum, the amount of the seller concession should match your contract. And that information is put right here. And it tells right here, it says, you know, report the total dollar amount and describe the items to be paid. Okay, down to the neighborhood section. I'm gonna breeze through this because it's, you know, this is pretty, you know, mundane, whereas we don't have very many properties that fall into these categories. But just to know, you want to look to see what your location is. This is what determines the acceptable comp distance. But here, you know, in California, I've underwritten all over the country, but here is mainly going to be suburban or urban. But, you know, typically if it's rural, then you can go to 3, you know, you go 5 to 10 miles for your comps. Suburban is usually 2 to 5 and urban is 1 to 3. So it just varies, but that's what that information is. Property values, keep in mind that if you see if it is declining, then it has to have something in the addendum to support the marketability, especially if you're going to extended LTVs, because obviously a declining market increases the risk for the investor. So that's just something to keep your third eye upon. Built up, you know, again, this is something that's is very typical. It doesn't have a whole lot of bearing on it, because even if it was under 25%, it could very well be a new development. The demand and supply, this is another thing, because with the market and the rates being what they are, you know, houses are not moving as quickly as they used to, or they did in a hotter market. And that leads to right underneath it where it has a marketing time. You know, this is usually going to be dictated by the overall market. So if we're in a slow period, then obviously it's going to be harder to find marketing times within these shorter periods. Okay, so again, this information here, I have yet to see an appraisal while working with iCore where this has been a deterring factor. Neighborhood boundaries, not, you know, that's not something that is very restrictive. Neighborhood description. Now, on the description and the market conditions, some appraisers, they'll jot down a note, or others will, you know, refer to the addendum. Now, it is important to know that, you know, in this case, when we review the market addendum, you'll see where it does hold a bit of weight, and it is going to be very similar to the property values where it's increasing, stable, and declining. So that's it really on the neighborhood section, with this appraiser alluding to addendums. It's nothing really that you need to, I ain't gonna say concern yourself with, but that you need to, to get unnerved about, because it will be explained further. Now, the site section, this is very important, because here, the first thing that I really zone in on is the zoning, because this happens to be a single family residential. You might have multifamily, you might even have zoning with commercial influence, but you do need to be cognizant of this, because in certain zoning aspects, it will either it could restrict your loan to value, or even restrict which investor programs that you will go to because of their overlays. So when you see the zoning, if you see a zoning that you don't understand and you need clarification, just reach out to your operations partner. And if they don't know, they can come to me, or you can just Google it. And that's really how you're going to learn a lot of this, because you can literally Google zoning descriptions, and it will tell you, and it'll break it down what the importance of these are and the potential restrictions. This little sentence right here, this is common in common sentence used when reviewing appraisal. It is this the highest and best use of the subject property as improved or as proposed if it was new construction? So that means that, if it was a house, if it was a commercial property that was converted into a residential property and the zoning doesn't allow for it, then that very well might not be the highest and best use of the subject property as it is improved or as it has been reconfigured. So this is important, because if it says no, then that's going to be a flag, and then the description has to be something that doesn't deter the marketability of it. Moving down here, this is probably the most important part of this section, because this tells what type of utilities you have. And you really and truly, 95% of the appraisals that you'll come across is going to be public. But it is very important to verify, because if in fact, not necessarily with the power, but with the water and the sanitary, if in fact this is not public, then this could create additional conditions. Additional conditions on the water, it could be a well. Well, wells, if it has well water, then well water has to have different certifications and tests. Sanitation, if it has a septic or something like that. Septics have specific requirements as well, as it pertains to the distance from the house, the size of it compared to the square footage of the site, all kinds of different restrictions. I'm not going to go into all the details of that right now, because again, this is something that really truly you can Google that. And as you make notes to questions you may have, it might, be best for you to, research that on your own. But I do want to make sure you understand that the water and sanitary, this is something that is critical, especially on government loans, because on your FHA and your VA loans, they have, different requirements if in fact, these two things are not public. And public just means, it's obvious that it's attached to the city water and city sewer system. Okay, so, and the offsite improvements as far as the street, if this is 99.9% is going to say public, but if it does say it's a private road, then of course the appraiser will have to explain that in his addendum to make sure it is accessible to emergencies and, and commuting in and out. Okay, so this little section right here, I learned to pay closest attention to this when reviewing a VA loan. Are there any adverse site conditions or external factors, easements, encroachments, environmental conditions? If this said yes, one of the things that's big with VA loans is, ironically, is flight path. If the property is close to an airport or let's say close to a highway, and there is what we would call, like, say, noise pollution or any type of noise obsolescence, then that has to be identified here, because there are restrictions based on those adverse site conditions. So again, when reviewing an appraisal, if you're looking at it, if you see anything there, you'll be able to tell what it is by the appraiser's description, but the effect that it may have on your loan request I encourage you strongly to reach out to your operations partner. All right, so with the site, and I'm gonna move down, let's go to the improvements. I'm gonna go through this because a lot of this is pretty self-explanatory and you're not gonna see a whole lot of variation. But there's one thing that you have to pay super close attention to, and that's in the first section. If it says 1 unit with an accessory unit, I found, here, especially out west, so many properties here in California, they have ADUs. This is where it should be mentioned. Now, if this is not checked and you find that there is one, then we'll have to get it corrected and all of that. But if it is an ADU right here, then of course that triggers a whole new, not a whole set of guidelines, but it does trigger other requirements, especially if that ADU, if you're looking to use rental income from that ADU, or if that ADU is permitted or unpermitted. It's, the way that each agency, and that means Freddie, Fannie, VA, FHA, USDA, the way that they look at that, each one of them varies. So depending on your loan type, you want to make sure that if it says if there is an ADU, or if you knew there was one there, make sure that you're doing a little bit of legwork. But that's the most important part of this first section, which is, whether it's ADU or not. Now, design type, whenever you see something that doesn't say, single family, or that doesn't allude to what we would consider a stick-built home, which is a normal home, or whether it's stucco or whatever, you want to pay attention to that. Because when you see something like Craftsman or something like that, this could be a trigger for a manufactured home. But this wasn't on a manufactured appraisal because they are identified as such. But these are just little things that you want to keep your third eye on. But I will tell you that if it was built in 1936, it's probably not a manufactured home. But I do want you to pay attention to the design style. I mean, not a whole lot of time. Just make sure you're cognizant of that. Move over to the second section. Very rarely do I see any basements out here because of earthquakes. So this isn't as common. So you're not going to have to see that a lot. And because basements, you're not going to see sump pumps and all of that. This section down here is important. Evidence of infestation. Immediately I can tell you it's going to trigger a termite inspection. If there's any dampness or settlement, then that could trigger an engineer's report, because that literally means settlement means a shift in your foundation. Dampness means you got some sort of leak that is in or around your foundation, which could also allude to a shift of the ground underneath. All right. Down here, just keep in mind that every house should have heating. Cooling is optional, but heating is pretty mandatory. Now, the type of fuel for it, if in fact it says something like propane or something like that, if you see any unique characteristics in your place, in the subject property, keep in mind, in the back of your mind, you need to see a comparable or two with that same sort of source. Because again, an appraisal isn't just the value of your house, it's the value of the houses around you. All right, moving over here to the exterior description. Again, this is pretty common. It's nothing here that would typically, raise any eyebrows or cause any pause. But down here, when you get to the amenities, I always look to see if there's a pool. Now, of course, you're going to see that on the next page. But if I know it's a pool there, then I know I'm going to look for it. Moving over here to the interior, nothing essential here. But down here it is, because in California, I see a lot of garage conversions and these sort of things. You want to know what type of car storage is there. Some agencies, especially, FHA, if in fact it's supposed to have a 2-car garage and you converted it, if it's not permitted, then we have to make sure that it can be used or reconfigured back to a garage to store cars. Now that gets into a bit more detail that, we'll speak about that offline if you have an instance of it. But again, these are the things in reviewing it from an underwriting perspective. These are the things that trigger for me. All right. Now, if this were a purchase, this line here, appliances, this says if these things are checked and this is a purchase, then your contract should show that these same items are staying with the property. Now, conversely, if your contract doesn't show anything and this says that these things are there, then you need to, then your contract might need to be amended. But, this part here, much like the section we spoke about initially, this was something that you really want to compare against your contract. Finished above grade, again, above grade, because we have very few basements and stuff, or if any out here. This is just giving you the room count and the square footage. This amount here is going to be in different parts of the appraisal. So if you have any variation, of course, you need to have it corrected. This will tell you any additional features, and a lot of this is self-explanatory. Now, in this one, where it says condition of the property, including any needing repairs or anything like that. Now, in this case, these are relatively minimal. If the house needed a lot of repairs, you'll see that 2 words, see addendum, because then the appraiser would break down what has to be done. Little side note, when you see amounts and stuff for repairs, typically it's not the appraiser pulling that number out of their head or their back pocket. There is a standard guide called the Marshall and Swift guide, where it lists, and it's always updated based on the market, what the average cost, depending on where the property is located, to get minor repairs done or certain repairs. So that's typically what they're using, because a lot of times they may say it costs $1,000, but you can get it estimated and you can get a repair for $500. That's all well and good as long as the appraiser can inspect it and they say it's good to go. But I just want to give you guys that side note about the cost to cure. As an underwriter, we're going to, we're always going to, to factor that in, unless depends on if it is something that's relatively cosmetic or something like that. But I will tell you, if it's anything structural, or it shows any type of decay or anything like that, 99.9%, I'm going to call for a cost secure. All right, moving down, we're almost finished first page. In the first 20 minutes, all right, I'm moving right along. Okay, so are there any physical deficiencies that affect the livability? Then that should be no, because again, the structural integrity, that's very important, because that structural integrity, which is, some also identified up there with the settlement, that is a trigger. Does the property generally conform to the neighborhood with functional utility style? This should always be yes. If it says no, then a couple things could come into play, restricting on the loan to value, or it might be an unacceptable property. Had one property where the guy had built a room, that's not connected to his house, and he put a awning that between the two, so he had a little runway. You walk in the front and fall out the back. That property was not acceptable, so it caused that loan to be declined. So very rarely will you see that, but please, if you see a no on this one right here, you do want to make sure that it's addressed. All right. Now here's the what we call the grid. The first thing that I want you to see is up here at the top. This says, and this is going to summarize what he has right here, but this is also important when reviewing SSRs, and I won't get into that, but this essentially tells you comparable properties that are currently listed for sale range in the neighborhood of 590,000. Now, if there were a large market of properties, this will have a range. Much like here, these are in the last year, properties have sold between 350 and 545. So when looking at, if your appraisal comes in at 590 and then all the properties sold in between 350 and 545, there has to be a notable reason for that. Now, this isn't going to deter the the underwriter's decision per se, but it is something that the underwriter looks at. Obviously, if you've seen an appraisal, you'll have your comparables and what have you. What I want you to pay attention to on a comparable, not trying to get too technical, but anytime you see an adjustment, that adjustment has to be consistent. Okay, the location, this is a busy road, this is north, this is residential. I know that because of these little acronyms here. But all these are residential. The appraiser is given an $8,000 adjustment. Now they'll identify and justify their adjustments in the addendum. I'm not really worried about that. I'm looking for consistency, because with all three of these being in a residential area, if one said 8,000 and one said 10,000, then that's a red flag. Same here. Now, in order to get detail about this, I would have to go in and do a calculation of the price per square foot on the site. But what you can notice here is the site here is 23,000 square feet, and the site here is only 8,000 square feet. This is half. You can see that this is roughly half of that. So you can just subtract easily, subtract 12,750 from the 23,490, whatever that number is, divide that into 33,000, and that's your price per square foot. Again, okay, I kind of nerded out on you that part, but that's how you do that. And then literally that calculation for the 45,000 here will be based on the difference between 8775 and 23,490. Yes, we do have to look and be cognizant of that, especially on your government appraisals, because as a lapsed SAR, that is part of being a SAR, is making sure that the adjustments pan out. Same difference all across the board. Again, the adjustments don't sway me. It's just the consistency of them. Okay. Now I say they don't sway me, but if there was a magnanimous, adjustment, like the property started at 545 and then they made adjustments and it ended up at 1,500,000, something crazy like that. Yeah, then that's crazy. But we don't see that as much since all the blown out appraisals being cracked down on. Okay, condition, obviously C4, you don't want to go above a C4, because if the condition is above C4, it may be an ineligible property. And that's just, condition meaning, if the property's ran down, beat down, and otherwise broke down. So you'll see here that he made a $50,000 condition for this one from C4 to C3. This is the same, but on this C4, while it does still have the characteristics of being a C4, it's not as bad as the subject. Now, I did say that you want consistency. So what we should see somewhere in the appraisal is why comparable 3, still being a C4 as a subject, got a $15,000 condition. We should see that, adjustment. We should see that in the appraisal. I'm not going to look for it, but just know that from an underwriter's aspect, I'm going to look for, something to show me that. All right, as far as your square footage and stuff, if in fact there was, difference in the room counts and whatnot, you should see some sort of adjustment unless it's negligible. In this case, what I do see is it's 7 total rooms. This is 1 bedroom smaller, and there's no condition, but the property is bigger by 40 square feet. So, there's a method to the madness with that, because there is also, you have to take into consideration the square footage, everything in this above grade room count and gross living area. All of these things have to, it just has to be a rhyme and a reason for it. For instance, this has 1.1 bath and 1 less bedroom, and you see an adjustment for $2,500. So essentially for that, I guess this is a half bath. For a whole bath, they're making a $2,500 adjustment. This one is 1,600 square feet, whereas our property is only 1,500 square feet. So this one is being adjusted down to meet the comparable aspect because it's bigger. So as far as it goes with adjustments, that's, again, that's more than you really need to do, but I did want to give you a rhyme and a reason. Here, down here is where, you'll see the main things. Remember, I showed you on the front page, there should be a pool somewhere. Now it says pool or spa, and it says none. So it didn't say any up front, so it shouldn't be here. And you see the third comparable, it does have a pool. So he's given $12,000 for the pool. I'm not mad at that. He does, I don't really care about that. We have a fireplace. This one doesn't. This one doesn't, but this one does. You see, we're giving $2,000 for the fireplace. So all of these, the gross adjustments and what's allowable, that too is going to be agency specific, and it's nothing you need to worry about when you're reviewing the appraisal. I just wanted you to see it through my eyes. moving down again with these things right here, this is nothing that I particularly worry about, but I want to make sure that you understand that this is, if in fact it says, seeing any addendum, you do want to make sure that there's an addendum. And it's, common for it to be when he's summarizing his sales comparison approach, which is part of the adjustments he used for his value. The most important part of this appraisal, and I know everybody knows this, as is subject to completion of plans, that's on the new construction, and subject to the following repairs. Anytime that is subject to, then of course we're going to need it, repaired and re-inspected, because we only close on as is appraisals, okay? Now, if it's something minor, the appraiser can fit it right here, then they will. If it's something major, you'll see that famous word, well, 3 words, see attached addendum. In this case, the subject had a detached garage, but the appraiser couldn't inspect it. So he couldn't, that garage could have been converted into something. It could have been, something that's not allowed in a garage, like, some, companies and whatnot won't allow you to grow things in your garage, if you know what I mean. So, if he can't inspect it, then, that's going to render this appraisal somewhat incomplete. This right here, your value, this is what the value that the appraiser is saying the property is worth. And this is that date. Now, I told you you'll see it throughout the appraisal a couple times. This is the main place. So whatever's here this is where the rule is, because this is based on the reconciliation of everything you've seen from page 1 to page 2 of the appraisal. All right. So this is where the rubber hits the road. You want to make sure that this is the value that you're using. Okay. Now, I will tell you that if this value is subject to, and if the appraiser is subject to, the appraiser may, on the 1004D, he may make it as is, and because, something that he didn't get to inspect might add value to it, then we could take the value on the reinspection if it's done by the certified appraiser. That's highly unlikely, but it can happen. But otherwise, this is where the value sits, lays, and where we want to make sure we see it from. Ooh, that was a lot. Okay. Now, this is where, this is where your addendums and stuff start right there. This section right here, this is important. This can be used for a couple of things. One thing I will tell you, and we don't do it as much here, but for insurance, homeowners insurance, typically, your homeowners insurance needs to meet or exceed your dwelling value. Because the site value, that's the cost of the land, and the land can't burn down, but the house can. So just keeping in mind, that's the significance of the difference between these two. This right here is very important. And you can see right here, it says HUD and VA only. For FHA and VA, the remaining economic life. What I will tell you is if you have an FHA loan and you're looking at the appraisal, you never want this to be lower than the term of your loan. Really and truly, if it's below 30 years, it's going to cause a flag. But the general rule of thumb is you don't want the remaining economic life of the property to be less than the term of your loan. That's just business. If in fact this was a PUD, which is a planned unit development where they have HOAs and all of that, then this information will be completed. This information is very important. And a lot of it's similar to if you looked at a condo, when we asked for the condo questionnaire, this is virtually the same information. Well, not all of it, but a lot of this is found on the condo questionnaire, as it is very important. Okay, so again, this is required if it is a PUD going up one, income approach to the value. It's not required by Fannie Mae, but it could be required by your government loans, whether it be FHA, VA, USDA, what have you. All right. Now, something that people may not pick up is that if you have a loan that is going Freddie Mac and the actual appraisal is referred to something a little different. It's referred to as a Freddie Mac Form 70, whereas Fannie Mae and FHA and VA is called a Form 1004. So you might hear the term a 1004 or a 1004D, and that is the reinspection form. So I just, thought that I'd throw that out there. Okay, and going through here, a lot of the stuff that you start seeing now is something what I call boilerplate. Boilerplate is a term used that is going to be on virtually every boiler. That was a term from back in New York where they had boilers. It's always going to have the same identifying information. This information on this page here, you'll see on virtually every appraisal that you ever come across. So I'm just going to breeze through that the quick way. Again, appraisal certification, this just says what he has to do that. A lot of appraisals are gonna have more than 3 comps, which is great. I looked at 3 and I analyzed 3 and I'm good with that. If I needed a 4th comparable, and sometimes you may, if in fact I looked at those first 3 and I didn't deem them as being a good representation of the subject property, I may require, as an underwriter, I can require additional comparable. And investors do that as well. So you might even see that, you might even get that as a post-closing requirement as an additional comp. And that just comes from the analyzation of the first 3, and they didn't deem that those as being sufficient comparables. All right, so that's why we have a 4th comp. Again, this is more boilerplate information, but this does tell you, remember I tell you don't want a C4 and a C5, this does explain it for you. Improvement features some minor deferred maintenance and physical deterioration due to normal wear and tear. That's the only thing you need to do. Right here, C5, this is why you don't want to see this. It's because it's obvious deferred maintenance and are in need of some significant repairs. If you see C6, you just may as well keep it moving, but because this is where improving substantial damage or deferred maintenance that are severe enough to affect the safety, soundness, and structural integrity. So you won't be able to move forward with those. This is also in your quality ratings. You'll see Q4s and Q5s. This is Q4 is what you'll typically see. And that's because it's just normal. It meets it or exceeds the requirement of applicable building codes. Q5, it maintains basic functionality, but there are some considerations. So, Q6, yeah, again, just like before, you don't want to see that. All right, so moving right along. And he just explains how they do the bathroom count. So this is nothing, this is just data set things. These are where your abbreviations come from. Remember when I did the old busy road and all of that? That's because this is just your glossary for it on every appraisal. Here's where the addendums start. And this is where he's literally going in and explaining things. As an underwriter, yeah, I'm looking for certain things in here, but not everything. And quite frankly, if I was looking for something specific, I Control F and then I type in what I want, what I was looking for. Like say if I was looking for solar information, if I was looking for meeting minimum property requirements, which is very significant in your government loans. If I was looking for specific things, because I'm pulling this up, always pull your appraisals up as a PDF. Then you can Control F and then you can look for that specific item. If I was looking for smoke detectors and carbon dioxide things, I could just Control F it and go specifically to that spot. Again, the addendum is covering a lot of the things I said earlier that I want to make sure that it covered in the addendums. I would be searching that. I said earlier, initially, where it said see addendum. This is the market conditions. Remember I said, that you'll see some of the same things where it says increasing, stable, and declining. On this is very important, especially on government loans. They're looking for that because, again, this is one of the things that is used. This information is used to determine the risk, a part of the risk assessment of the property, not the borrower, but the property. So on here, I do want you to know that even if it does say declining, that doesn't disqualify. because a lot of this, is based on the current market conditions, and we know that we're in a downtrend because of higher rates. Inventory analysis, median sales price, list price, days on the market. Of course, that can be declining. In this case, for this property in Fontana, California, it's either stable or it's increasing. So this is in what would be considered an active market. But if anything on here was adverse, your underwriter is going to look at that. And if it could affect the marketability or the agency's requirements, then it could restrict your loan to value. So in any time that your underwriter gives you that information, then he or she should be able to back it up with why, with meaning their guideline or any printed restriction. But on here, I wouldn't, you don't have to go through and try to figure out everything that it's saying, but just look to see if anything says declining. Because if it does, you look at it, then, we're gonna, you want to be able to justify it. If to no one else, you want to justify it to yourself. All right. So again, a lot of these things now you're going to see, addendums and whatnot. But here, this is just telling you the dimensions of the house and how they come up with the square footage and all of that. Living area, if in fact it's 1 or 2, 3-story or whatever, it would give you all of that information. Again, stuff for the underwriter. This is boilerplate. You can actually tell by the font that this ain't something that they typed actually. But again, this is just, normal information. If the appraiser has something specific, he will put it right there. I came to this page because this part is very important, because on here is, and this is one of the first places that you see it, where it has, anytime that you see the expiration date of the license of the appraiser, it has to be later than the effective date of the appraisal. Now, I will tell you, now he said that this appraisal is as of 3/22. That's when he verified the information. He signed it on 3/28. I don't use the date he signed it. I use the effective date on the appraisal. Okay, just to keep it 100 with you. Now, this is what I always say. It's time to go to the videotape, because here's where the pictures come in. When viewing the pictures, you always want to keep your third eye out for anything that can be environmental or shows any visible deterioration. Because even if the appraiser doesn't mention it, doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be mentioned. And your underwriter will draw attention to something if in fact it does, raise flags. And those flags are a lot more, they flap a lot louder for your government loans. Okay, and looking at this, you're looking at the front view, the rear view of the property. You don't want to see any exposed wires. You don't want to see, any machines, abandoned machines or anything like that. Okay, on this one, street scene, what I'm looking for, I want to make sure I don't see any commercial influence, any huge power lines, anything that will be considered an obsolescence. And obsolescence means negative impact in this case. Going through here, looking at the house, we don't get down with their tidiness, but we do want to make sure we don't see cabinets hanging off and, water puddles on the floor, stains on the walls and ceilings, or broken windows. Okay, again, just going through it, you just don't want to see things in disrepair, because if it is in disrepair, then it needs to be mentioned. You also want to make sure you do have to have a bathroom site. You have to see every bedroom. You need to see the kitchen and the common living area. So, you'll know if based on the room count, if you got everything. So here's the bedrooms. We've gone through those. We saw the kitchen and bathrooms and all of that. Here's the laundry room. And then the dining room. I don't like that cat. I had to go back to it. Okay, so again, we don't get into how they have their house, their decor. We just get into the things. This is showing you the smoke detector. Into the painting. Painting is kind of off, but you can see that
That Gorilla Tape didn't work.
Yeah, the Gorilla Tape didn't work. Okay, the other thing is I'm glad that they show safety bar releases. You'll see bars on windows in a lot of in a lot of photos. And if you do, they do have to show the safety release latch. And it does have to look like, at least look like it's in operable working order. Okay, your water heater, now this one looks a little beat down, but it is outside, which is not uncommon. Of course, in California, because of earthquakes, we need to see that it is double strapped. If you're not in California, you want to make sure that, you know, depending on where the property is located, that's something that you can Google to see if in fact it is required. Now, if this were a government loan, this would be considered health and safety potential. You see, you know, jaggedness and stuff like that. The appraiser does mention some cosmetic needs for repair. He did not put a large cost secure on it, and it doesn't benefit, or it's not, you know, wise for a lender to create a escrow account for a cost secure over something that's below $2,000, really and truly. But in some cases, the underwriter or, you know, the investor might require that certain things be repaired. This is a non-owner occupied property. So, you know, of course, if this was his primary residence, I'm sure that wouldn't be there. Here's the bars on the windows, first time that I'm seeing them, but had I not seen the latch initially, I would be going back and looking for it now. Having trash on the side, I mean, that's nothing, but if we had just trash that wasn't in bags and stuff that could create infestation, that could cause problems. Now these look like, you know, clay or some sort of pipes and stuff. This isn't a huge deterrent, but if this was wood, could be because of termites and in other types of things. This is not a good site. This were a government loan, that would have to be removed and a picture shown. When I reviewed this appraisal initially, the fact that we have this machinery on the side yard, you see the flat tire there, see a toilet behind it, which is pretty bad. But because this machinery is there, we have to look at that for potential environmental issues. Why? Because of potential leakage of oil or anything into the ground. So when you have, if there's machinery or something on the property, just know that that could potentially be a problem. Now, the appraiser can clearly say, you know, I saw no evidence of, and then boom, we'll breeze over it. In this case, I just requested an appraiser to give me an addendum. I will say that this is on concrete, so the likelihood of it getting into the soil and plus it's not a, you know, it's not like it's a big storage bin or nothing like that, but it has to be addressed. Don't think that, you know, that the underwriter or the investor is going to say, that don't matter. Everything matters, okay? Now, this is the storage unit. First thing I thought when I saw this was a potential ADU. But, you know, inside it very well could be, but it's not being used as one now. So, you know, don't start now, won't be none. I'm not going to create a problem if there isn't one, but I will tell you that this does have the influence of a potential ADU. But, you know, I can't hear what I can't see. Yeah, I don't understand this, so I'm just gonna keep on moving past that. I mean, you know, I guess somebody ain't allowed to go in the house, you know, take that shit outside. Okay, and here's the bathroom, you know, they got, you know, so, yeah, all right, keep moving. So again, from the front of the subject, you know, you wanna see, just looking for commercial influences, anything that could be a degradation. Here's the garage. Now, we did get a 1004D and he had opened it up, but you have to be, the appraiser has to be able to see it. That's what he couldn't do. Here's a broken window pane. It's behind the bars and whatnot. You know, it's cracked and not broken. Again, that's not something that on a conventional loan that I'm going to require to be fixed. If there was a government insured loan, yes, that would have to be done. And then the comparables. What I'm really looking for is I don't want to see the stately Wayne mansion comped up against this property. You know, I don't want to see houses in Calabasas comped up against houses in Fontana. That don't fly. But it's just common sense. If in fact the comparables are in the immediate area, you see me hovering around the address, I know I'm in Fontana and all of that, then I'm going to be okay. All right. So, and they did have 4 comparables. If they have a comparable, they got to have a picture of it. So keep that in mind. Okay, so here's the property. Here's a sketch, very important. Here is your outhouse where Uncle Joe has to go. Here is, that storage that does have the propensity to be an ADU, but not currently used as such. Here's the detached garage and then uncovered patio. This is the room. Now, when looking at this, I'm moving through it, but you want to count these, and you got to have, it says 4 bedrooms. I need to have 4 bedrooms in that grid. So it's not something that you can just, oh, got a sketch, keep it moving. No, you do need to check a few things. If it says 4 bedrooms and 2 baths, you need to see on the sketch 4 bedrooms and 2 baths. Because the other thing that you may see on here is it'll say 3 bedrooms and a den. And then they've converted a bedroom into a den, which is their prerogative. It's not, doesn't disqualify the property, but you want to make sure that the appraiser is identifying the property correctly. So moving through, there's nothing else really on here with the exception of location map, the final important factor. On this, what you don't want to see, and I scroll down, you see the 10 freeway. I don't want to see my subject property up here and the comparables over here or down here. You don't want to cross railroad tracks and major highways, which do in some cases divide socioeconomic classes, which increases property value. Houses are higher on this side of the 10 than on that side of 10. You want the comparables to be in the same vicinity as your subject. The other thing that you would look on here, and you might detail it with the overhead view, is if in fact it has anything like any industrial recognitions and stuff here. You got parks and a high school, a medical center, very, very common, no problem. You even got a bowling alley close by. So, this isn't anything negative here, but just keep your eye out. And it's not something that's going to, necessarily change things. I'm scrolling past the flood map because that doesn't really do it. Then, going on through, you do want to see that you have the appraiser's license and stuff in there. And then, it just gives his stuff. Now, the crazy thing is that the site map, the sketch, and this, meaning the overhead view, they're usually in different parts of the appraisal, and they're usually before your comparable photos. In this case, he made it last, so I had to keep scrolling. But when looking at this, it's very simple. You don't want to see that here's my subject, then I've got, all these power lines over here. I got a factory right here. I got a gas station right here. You just want to make sure that if we're in a residential area, that overhead view shows the residential area. You ain't got to get into, identifying, how many cars they got in their backyard and all of that stuff, but from this view. But you do want to make sure that the property confirms to the area. I got in right under 5 minutes. So, I know there's a lot to digest, but I just wanted to take you guys through my eyes when I'm looking at an appraisal. Hopefully throughout here, you could see that, there's a lot of things on appraisal that you may not have known that, that sparks the underwriter's interest or the investor's requirement. So, hopefully that helped. All right, so.
Questions, anybody? You guys can unmute, or we do have some people here. If you guys can speak loud, please.
I do have a question. When it comes to rental, from a bank unit or just the property itself, something will come up with an estimate. But what if our estimate was a little bit higher than what is actually on the appraised value?
Okay, so his question had to do with if in fact this was like, a rental property, say even a 2 to 4 unit. And his question, if I got it correctly, was what if his rents were higher than the market rents?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, so in the case of if you are collecting rent higher than the market rent, you have to prove it. And it has to be reasonable, because if in fact, now I will tell you that stands, you get a lot more credibility with that if it is a refinance than a purchase, because you can show where you've been getting this sort of rent. So just because I have a lease at 5,000 in the market rent, if the market rent says 2,500, it's highly unlikely that that's going to fly. But if it is reasonable, all you got to do is justify it, because market rents don't restrict you unless you step way far out of bounds, or if you cannot justify it, or if it is a purchase and it's vacant. Now, if it's vacant, then I'm going with the market rents 99.9% of the time. But if it is occupied and you can prove it, then by all means, I'd go with that higher amount. It has to be reasonable though, and not raise any flag. That was a good question. All right, who else?
Guys, you guys have your underwriter here. This is the moment. You guys have to ask all your questions.
All right, not all
Don't
of
be
them.
shy.
Not all your questions, just a couple of them. All right, but for real, if anyone has any questions, and if any of you guys know me, if you have any questions offline that you don't want to speak in front of everyone or whatever the case may be, you can always email me. I welcome, the opportunity to, to discuss potential issues with you. I feel very confident in the knowledge that I have, but I also know that, I can always be learning as well. And if there is a way to look at something to make it acceptable, then I'm going to find it, because my goal is to close every loan, but I need for it to stay closed and not become post-closing issues. So if I raise any concerns that you may or may not agree with, ask me for justification, and I will give you at least my train of thought. But I will also say that your operational partners in here, they have no qualms about, not just pushing back, but seeking that further clarification. Darshan and I have worked through many underwriting issues, well, not just underwriting issues, but appraisal issues together. And he has great communication with our AMCs, who the appraisals come through. But now keep in mind that this is a conventional single family appraisal. There are variations for a 2 to 4 family. There are variations for a condo appraisal, but the gist of the information is exactly the same. Your value is only as verifiable as your comparables, and anything that the appraiser mentions, he must justify. If he says see it in an addendum, then you need to make sure that it is an addendum to that effect. Look at your photos. If there's anything on those photos that raise your eyebrows, I guarantee you they're going to raise mine too. But again, if you have any questions, concerns, or things that you want me to cover in greater detail, hit me up. I'll answer directly, and I'll share the information to everyone. All right. Thanks for your time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Darryl from PDX.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Ooh, hey, good talking.